You know, it's not often we get to talk about the story like this because we don't talk about cars a whole lot unless it's about Natasha's car breaking down typically. And, that's good every now and then for a small discussion. But, ultimately, we are probably all going to end up at one point or another in EVs
Yeah.
because governments everywhere, including here in Quebec, kind of mandating the fact that I think in Quebec it's by 2035, every new car sold will have to be an EV. Now, obviously, if you have an old car and you want to keep driving it, you'll be able to. But in terms of buying a new car, EVs are what it would seem, government is suggesting and mandating that people end up doing. So it's interesting to note, you'd think in an environment like that, maybe prices might be going up. But we've seen Tesla, which is one of the bigger EV companies, now repeatedly slash prices on its cars. It's done it at least 2 or 3 times to the point where their base model SUV is now less expensive than the average gas-powered SUV, something you probably didn't think would happen for a long, long time. And the trend seems to be spreading in the industry with all manufacturers. Everybody wants market share in the EV sector. So we thought we'd try to understand why it's happening. Rachel DORAN is Director of Policy and Strategy at Clean Energy Canada and online right now. Rachel, thanks for being here this afternoon.
Thanks so much for having me.
So I guess it would be safe to say and fair that this is not a uniquely Tesla situation. Everyone wants part of this pie, and price cutting is the way to get it?
Yeah, there's been a lot of exciting things happening in the EV industry just in even the last year. And one of those things is really, you mentioned in your lead-in, governments talking about this sort of ramp up to all electric. But we're really seeing manufacturers go all in. And I think, there's been a lot of untapped demand out there, people on wait lists looking for electric vehicles, people who already knew that it was going to be cheaper over the lifetime of the vehicle because of lower gas costs and lower maintenance costs, who wanted electric vehicles. But now what we're seeing is as all these automakers start to try to get in on the game and we see more models come out on the market and more manufacturers lining up to produce them, we're really seeing this big fight and competition that we haven't seen in the market to date. So yeah, Tesla had kind of the market cornered for a while, but now they really are needing to think about how are their models going to continue to be competitive as all these new vehicles come on the market.
I would have said that one thing that all of these vehicles had in common is that they were all very expensive. So looking at the prices coming down so rapidly, does this mean that prior to this, they were just grossly overpriced, or what has made them able to be more affordable now?
Yeah, so maybe a few things. I mean, there were definitely, not cost parity between internal combustion engine vehicles and electric vehicles, but, over time, they've been, even 5 years ago, this very, very small market share of overall vehicle sales globally. Mm-hmm. And anything, as you start hitting these kind of mass production and a lot of things rolling off production lines, you really see kind of cost savings to the manufacturer as you get that to that mass production point. And right now, the EV industry globally is booming. It's expected that global sales will leap another 35% this year after a record-breaking 2022. So we're really seeing, at the same time as last year, some of the normal internal combustion engine vehicles were actually going up in price because of supply chain and other issues. Electric vehicle prices were going down around the same amount. So, we're really starting to see that point where the two are converging over time. But maybe for your listeners, just to be aware, especially in Quebec, where you can access provincial rebates right off the purchase of a new or used vehicle that you can stack with federal rebates.
Right.
Already when you were looking at a purchase price of maybe in the 40s, you can take up to $12,000 knocked off the top. So this kind of price parity is even maybe more exciting for people in other provinces who don't have access to that level of initial rebates off the cars they have today.
Yeah, and of course Tesla would realize that because you want to drop the price to a level where in a place like Quebec, you could take advantage of that $12,000 between federal and provincial. They could sell a whole lot more cars if you drop your base price to qualify for that.
Yeah, for sure. But we've definitely seen this in lots of jurisdictions. So, Tesla, as you mentioned, had global price cuts across all models. Ford's Mach-E announced, some price reductions coming. And we're really seeing, automobile manufacturers really starting to think about how do you get into those lower price brackets where you're going to access an even bigger segment of the market. So like in the US, for example, the battery-powered version of GM's Equinox is going to start this year around $30,000 US when it comes out this fall. That's still about $3,000 more than the least expensive gasoline-fueled one. But by the time you factor in government incentives in the US, that electric Equinox is going to be cheaper even as of this year. So, we're going to see over the course of the next decade, those battery prices come down as we see more minerals and metals manufactured, more battery plants opening. That price differential is just going to keep getting closer and closer over the course of the next decade. But again, in Quebec, you're already seeing this great advantage for electric with some of those upfront rebates and some of those long-term savings for the, plugging in your car to cheap electricity rather than paying high upfront prices at the gas pumps.
Should mention as well, one of the things I read is the fact that while we're not sort of paying attention much to this, the Chinese are all over this EV sector too, expanding, and we're going to start to see their vehicles showing up in North America as well, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And interestingly, in China, they have already for a while, been looking at, there's maybe different cars that are going to make sense for different people. And they've had some lower priced models, maybe not with quite the same range as someone, in North America might be shopping for. But I think we'll see some of that differential in the market too. If you want to pay a little cheaper and you want to, have a little bit less range, that may be one of the possibilities. You might get price parity quickly. But, just for people who haven't looked on the market recently, the average electric vehicle being sold in Canada today is really usually over around 400 kilometers in range. I mean, that can take you pretty far, on any of your road trips. So, there's going to be, I think, some of those choice options that are available in places like China as these manufacturers start to export to other markets.
Yeah, sure. I'm wondering, too, the idea that, people were clamoring to get into these cars, we kept hearing all the time, even though they were very expensive pre-rebate or even now, is the fact that you could walk into a showroom, buy yourself an EV, but then have to wait 6 months, 9 months, a year to get your car. Is that changing?
Well, we've actually seen some movement by the Canadian government in the past year and the Quebec government, and even south of the border. Jurisdictions are really thinking about how do we actually get, with this untapped demand for EVs, how do we make sure that consumers in our jurisdiction have access? And the Quebec government's actually been a leader on this. So the situation is slightly better in Quebec than it is in the rest of the country, where they already have regulated sales targets, which basically just means auto manufacturers have to make available for sale a certain percentage of the vehicles on their lot, just need to be electric. So it's going to be helpful to see the Canadian government finalize those regulations too, because it really is a bit of a competition right now to try to get vehicles and access them for all those people who are interested in purchase. And 15 states already have this kind of legislation in play. So we just want to make sure some of those vehicles end up in Quebec and on lots here rather than being exported to California or other jurisdictions.
Okay,
just
sure.
quickly on the text line, some people are still just dubious about electrical cars, but also asking about hybrids, saying that they would feel a little bit more confident in a hybrid. Are we blowing right by hybrids? Are those going to become a thing of the past as well?
Yeah, so I think hybrids are really something that we're not seeing have this, by the time battery electric vehicles prices really come down, that older hybrid technology like your Toyota Prius, et cetera, it doesn't have the same emissions savings and you don't have the same cost savings because, as we said, you're paying gas prices. So that technology we're really not seeing as much take off. What's really the sort of two things we're seeing really take over market share are either plug-in hybrids. So those ones, you have a battery and it goes for, say, 50 kilometers. So if you were doing a daily commute, likely you'd be able to do all of your commuting on that electric battery. But then if you need to go on a longer road trip, that car still has a gas tank. So you do have access to kind of flip over to the gas technology. So that's one version, and that'll be included in the proposed kind of Canadian regulations around what would be available and would count to make available to Canadians. And then you have pure battery electric vehicles, which are the ones I've been talking about that now have, over kind of 400 kilometers in range. You get all of your energy from kind of plugging in either at a public charger or in your own garage, where most people do, who have access to home charging, 80% of their charging.
So just to further confuse the situation, and we have to wrap up here, I know some people are trying out hydrogen-powered cars. What's happening with those? Is that actually a major part, or do you think it's a major part, becomes out of the market?
You know, I mean, we tend to be technology neutral and like all zero emission cars, but a lot more of the market segment right now is battery electric in those smaller cars. We might see hydrogen play a role for like the decarbonization of big transport trucks and other things moving forward. But just because of the accessibility of the charging network, the ability to plug in at home, we're just seeing battery electrics take over a bigger market share.
All right. Rachel, I want to thank you so much. We really appreciate your time today.
Great. Really nice chatting with
All right.
you. Have a nice afternoon.
You too. Rachel DORAN from Clean Energy Canada. So there you go. Prices keep coming down. The other part of the story, besides China, which is now getting into EVs, is the fact that all the major North American car manufacturers finally starting to get those EVs into showrooms. So it's going to get a whole lot more competitive, which is good news for the consumer because it will drive prices down.
Affordable.